Hey guys, tonight we slip into the sands of ancient Egypt, where the air hums with secrets and the Nile whispers stories older than time. Picture yourself standing on a dune, the sun sinking into a molten horizon, painting the pyramids in shades of fire. A faint breeze carries the scent of papyrus and dust, and somewhere a pharaoh's final command echoes 10 days of silence after his death. Why? That's what you're here to unravel. Fair warning though, diving into Egypt's mysteries is like navigating a crocodile-infested river. You probably won't survive this without a few goosebumps. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop a comment with your location and local time. It's wild to see where you're all drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Egypt sometime around 1200 BCE, and the world feels different. The air is thick with heat, the kind that clings to your skin like a second layer. Your barefoot toes sinking into the warm silt by the Nile, and the river's gentle lapping is the only sound breaking the stillness. This is a land where gods walk among mortals, where every sunrise is a pact with Ra the sun god, and every death is a doorway to eternity. You're here because of one pharaoh, a ruler whose name is whispered in awe, though we'll keep it vague for now. Let's call him the Silent King. His death has just shaken the kingdom, and his final decree is stranger than most. For 10 days, Egypt must fall silent. No chatter, no songs, no clinking of tools. Just nothing. You can't help but wonder what kind of man or god could demand such a thing and expect an entire nation to obey. Let's set the scene. You're in Memphis, the beating heart of Egypt, where whitewashed walls gleam under the relentless sun. The city sprawls like a living thing, its streets a maze of merchants, priests, and farmers. Temples to Ptah and Amun loom large, their stone faces staring down as if they know something you don't. You pass a market stall, usually alive with haggling, but now it's eerily quiet. The vendor, a wiry man with kohl-rimmed eyes, just nods at you, his lips sealed. You notice the absence of sound like it's a physical weight. No laughter, no donkey brays, not even the usual buzz of flies. It's as if the gods themselves pressed a finger to Egypt's lips. You smirk, thinking, bet someone's still whispering about last night's beer. But the silence is real and it's heavy. Why this decree? To understand, you need to step into the Pharaoh's world. He wasn't just a king, he was a living god, the bridge between earth and the divine. When he died, it wasn't just a funeral, it was a cosmic event. The Silent King's death, historians say, was recorded on papyrus scrolls now crumbled, but once vivid with ink. One mainstream fact stands out: pharaohs were mummified over 70 days, a process so sacred, it demanded absolute precision. The 10-day silence, though, was unique to this ruler. You picture embalmers in dim chambers, their tools clinking softly. Wait, no, even that's forbidden. They work in hush, wrapping the king's body to prepare it for the afterlife. You can't help but shiver. Imagine trying to sneeze and holding it in for a decade of days. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some Egyptologists whisper that the silence wasn't just respect, it was fear. The Silent King, rumor has it, believed his spirit could be trapped in the mortal world if noise disturbed his transition to the Duat, the underworld. One wrong shout, one dropped pot, and his claw, his soul, might get stuck, haunting Egypt like a grumpy ghost. You chuckle, imagining a spectral pharaoh yelling, "Quiet down, I'm trying to ascend." But the fear was real. Priests spread tales of divine wrath, ensuring compliance. You glance at a nearby temple, its walls carved with warnings: obey or face Anubis's judgment. The jackal-headed god's stare feels a bit too personal. Historians still argue whether the silence was spiritual or political. Some say the silent king used it to cement his legacy, forcing Egypt to pause and reflect on his greatness. Others think it was a power play, a way to control a restless kingdom during a vulnerable transition. You ponder this as you walk past a noble's villa, its shutters closed tight. Inside, you bet they're scheming, but even their whispers are muted. The silence, you realize, is more than absence. It's a presence, a force that binds the living to the dead. You feel it in your bones like the hum of a tuning fork just out of reach. You keep moving the Nile at your side, its waters reflecting a sky bruised with dusk. Reeds sway and a heron takes flight, its wings slicing the quiet. You think about the people around you. Farmers, scribes, kids who'd normally be shrieking by the riverbank. They're all part of this strange pact. You wonder how they manage. No bedtime stories, no tavern songs. You'd probably smuggle a lute under your bed, but these folks take it seriously. The Silent King's decree isn't just law, it's a test of devotion. You smirk again, picturing yourself whispering, "This guy's ego needs its own pyramid." Let's zoom out. Egypt in this era is a powerhouse, its wealth built on grain gold and the Nile's endless generosity. The Silent King ruled during a time of relative stability, though cracks were forming, rival priests, ambitious nobles, and whispers of foreign threats. His death, you sense, was a pivot point. The silence might have been his way of saying, "I'm gone, but I'm still in charge." You pass a group of soldiers, their spears glinting, their mouths shut. Even they obey, though you bet they're itching to grumble about the heat. The whole kingdom's holding its breath, and you're right there with them. As you wander, you notice the stars emerging, pinpricks of light that feel like eyes watching. In Egypt, the night sky is a map of the gods, and the Silent King's soul is supposedly climbing toward it. You imagine him now, his spirit navigating the underworld, facing trials only a god king could endure. The silence, you realize, is Egypt's way of cheering him on, or maybe ensuring he doesn't turn back. You pause by a palm tree, its fronds rustling faintly, and you think, is that allowed, or are the trees breaking the rules too? The thought makes you grin, but you keep it quiet just in case. The city's edges fade into desert, and you feel the vastness of Egypt around you. This silence isn't just Memphis, it's Thebes, Alexandria, every village along the Nile. You picture thousands of people, from sandal makers to high priests, united in this strange, soundless vigil. It's eerie but oddly beautiful, like a painting where the colors are all muted. You take a deep breath, tasting the dry air, and feel a connection to these ancient lives. They're not so different from you, except maybe for their weird obsession with cat mummies. You're hooked now, ready to dig deeper into this mystery. You're still in ancient Egypt, the Nile's gentle ripples catching moonlight as you wander its banks. The air is cooler now, a soft relief from the day's heat, but the silence clings like damp linen. Memphis hums with an absence of sound, and you're starting to feel it in your chest, a quiet so deep it's almost alive. You're here to sense Egypt's pulse, to sink into the rhythm of a land where gods and mortals blur. The Silent King's 10-day decree still holds the kingdom in its grip, and you're tracing its roots, feeling the weight of a world that breathes reverence and fear in equal measure. You smirk, thinking, if I stub my toe, will the gods send a strongly worded papyrus? The riverbank is your path, its silt cool under your feet. Reeds sway their whispers, barely daring to break the hush. You imagine the Nile as Egypt's heartbeat, steady and eternal, carrying life from the delta to the cataracts. This is no ordinary river, it's a god Hapi, the one who floods the fields and feeds the nation. You glance at the water, half expecting to see Hapi's face staring back, but it's just your reflection warped by ripples. The Nile's power is undeniable, though. Historians note that its annual floods, timed like divine clockwork, made Egypt the breadbasket of the ancient world. Without it, there'd be no pyramids, no pharaohs, no silent king. You nod to the river, muttering, "Nice work, Hapi. Don't flood my sandals, okay?" You keep walking, passing mud brick homes where lamplight flickers through slits. Inside, families sit in silence, maybe exchanging glances or passing bread. You wonder what they're thinking. Are they mourning the king, or just annoyed they can't gossip about the neighbor's new chariot? The silence feels like a shared secret, binding everyone from scribes to fishermen. You picture a kid in one of those houses, desperate to giggle, but holding it in face red as a pomegranate. It's a funny image, but it makes you realize how human this moment is. People just like you navigating a weird rule with a mix of duty and defiance. Let's dive into Egypt's soul. This is a land of cycles, sunrise, sunset, flood, drought. Everything turns like the stars above, which you notice now, blazing in a sky so clear it feels like you could touch Orion. The Egyptians lived by these rhythms, their calendar carved around the Nile's moods. But the silent king's death, that's a disruption, a crack in the order. You feel it as you pass a small shrine, its offerings of lotus flowers wilting in the quiet. The shrines to Osiris, lord of the underworld, and you can't help but think of the king's journey. His soul, his Ka, is out there somewhere navigating trials to join the gods. You whisper, "Good luck, buddy. Don't trip on any scorpions." Here's a quirky tidbit: some fringe scholars claim the Nile itself went quiet during the 10 days. Not the water, obviously that'd be ridiculous, but the wildlife. Herons, crocodiles, even the frogs that usually croak all night supposedly hushed, as if nature itself mourned the king. You raise an eyebrow, picturing a crocodile sulking silently instead of snapping at fish. It's a stretch, but the idea sticks. Egyptians saw animals as divine messengers, so maybe a silent heron was a sign from Anubis. You glance at the river again, half hoping for a mute frog to prove the point, but all you hear is nothing. Typical. Historians still argue whether the silence was about devotion or control. Some say it was a spiritual necessity, a way to guide the king's soul without earthly noise clogging the cosmic airways. Others lean political, arguing the king's heirs used the decree to flex power-keeping nobles and priests in check during a shaky transition. You ponder this as you pass a temple, its columns looming like silent sentinels. Inside, priests are probably burning incense, their lips moving in soundless prayers. You wonder if they're loyal to the king or plotting something. The silence, you realize, hides as much as it reveals. You veer toward the city's edge where fields stretch under starlight. Farmers should be shouting to their oxen, but their tools are still, their voices gone. The harvest waits, and you can almost taste their frustration. Egypt's economy, built on grain, doesn't pause easily, yet here it is frozen for 10 days. You imagine a merchant in Memphis itching to haggle, but stuck counting beads in silence. Bet he's inventing new curse words in his head. You think, grinning. The whole kingdom's on pause, and it's both eerie and oddly unifying. Rich or poor, everyone's in this together, bound by the king's last wish. Let's talk about the land itself. Egypt's a desert ribbon hugged by the Nile, with cliffs and dunes framing its edges. You feel the vastness as you look west, where the pyramids of Giza gleam faintly, their shadows swallowing the horizon. These aren't just tombs, they're statements, proof of Egypt's might. The Silent King's pyramid, wherever it is probably being prepped right now, its chambers filled with treasures for his afterlife. You picture workers hauling limestone, their usual chants replaced by grim nods. The silence makes their labor feel heavier, like they're building a monument to quiet itself. You pause by a date palm, its fronds swaying faintly. The air smells of earth and water, a reminder of how fragile this paradise is. Without the Nile, Egypt's just sand. You think about the people who've lived here for centuries, coaxing life from this narrow strip. They're resilient, but the silence tests them. You imagine a baker unable to call out his wares, or a mother shushing her crying baby, worried the gods might hear. It's a strange kind of devotion, one that demands sacrifice. You smirk, thinking, if I were them, I'd be whispering rebellion by day 3. As you walk, you notice the stars shifting, time slipping forward. The Nile reflects them like a mirror, and you feel Egypt's pulse in the stillness. This isn't just a kingdom, it's a story etched in stone and water. The Silent King's decree is part of that story, a chapter you're only beginning to understand. You pass a fisherman's boat tethered, and still its net's dry. The man inside catches your eye, his face unreadable. You nod, respecting his silence, but you can't help wondering what he's holding back. Everyone's got a story, and the quiet only makes them louder. You're deeper in Memphis now. The city's pulse faint, but steady. The temples, the homes, the fields, they're all part of this strange, silent dance. You feel like an intruder, yet oddly at home. Egypt's history is a tapestry, and you're tracing one thread, the Silent King's final act. You think back to that crocodile dung sunscreen you heard about in the market yesterday. Gross, right? It's a reminder of how vivid this world is, even in silence. You're ready to keep going, to peel back more layers of this mystery, one quiet step at a time. You're still tracing the Nile's edge, its waters glinting under a crescent moon, the silence of Memphis wrapping you like a shawl. The city's pulse is faint, subdued by the Silent King's 10-day decree, and you're starting to feel like a ghost wandering a living tomb. Tonight, you're peeling back the veil on the sacred rites that follow a pharaoh's death, the rituals that turn a mortal king into a god eternal. The air smells of dust and lotus, and you can almost hear the gods whispering. Except, of course, you can't, because silence rules. You grin, thinking, if I trip and curse, will Anubis send me to time out? You veer toward a temple district, where sandstone walls rise carved with hieroglyphs that dance in torchlight. The Temple of Ptah looms largest, its columns like petrified giants. You pause, imagining the chaos of a pharaoh's death. When the Silent King passed, it wasn't just a loss, it was a cosmic fracture. His Ka, his spiritual essence, needed to be guided to the Duat, the underworld, and that's where the rituals come in. You picture priests in leopard skin robes, their faces stern, moving with the precision that makes your morning routine look like a sandstorm. These rites you're learning are Egypt's way of keeping the universe spinning. Let's dive into the big one, mummification. Historians confirm it's a 70-day process, a mainstream fact etched in every Egyptology textbook. You imagine the embalmer's workshop a dim chamber reeking of natron and resin. The Silent King's body lies on a stone slab, his heart still in place, crucial for the weighing of the heart ceremony, where Anubis checks if his soul's pure. You wince as you picture the embalmer's tools, hooks, knives, and jars for organs. They remove the liver, lungs, everything but the heart, storing them in canopic jars with gods' faces glaring from the lids. You mutter, hope they don't mix up the jars. Awkward afterlife moment. The silence adds a twist. Normally, embalmers might chant or sing hymns to Osiris, but not now. You envision them working and hush their movements like a silent ballet. Every wrap of linen, every sprinkle of natron is a prayer without sound. You wonder how they focus. Imagine trying to wrap a mummy while holding your breath. Terrified a sneeze might doom the king's soul. You chuckle picturing an embalmer mouthing, "Don't mess this up. Don't mess this up." The process is sacred, but the silence makes it feel like the gods are watching closer than usual, their eyes narrower. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some obscure texts hint that during the Silent King's rites, priests use silent spells. Instead of speaking incantations, they traced them in the air or wrote them on papyrus, believing the gods could read intent without sound. You raise an eyebrow, imagining a priest air-doodling hieroglyphs like a cosmic charades game. It's a fringe theory, but it fits Egypt's obsession with the unseen. You glance at the temple, its entrance dark, and wonder if those spells are still lingering, invisible but potent. Maybe that's why your skin's prickling, or maybe it's just the desert chill. Historians still argue whether the silence during these rites was purely religious or a mix of faith and politics. Some say it ensured the king's safe passage, letting his ka glide to the Duat without earthly noise as interference. Others suspect it was a way to unify a grieving kingdom, forcing everyone to focus on the king's divinity rather than squabbling over his throne. You ponder this as you pass a shrine, its offerings of bread and beer untouched. The silence, you realize, is a ritual in itself, a collective act of will that binds Egypt to its fallen god. You keep moving the temple district, fading into narrower streets. You pass a house where a faint glow spills from a window. Inside, you imagine a family performing their own small rites, maybe burning incense or arranging flowers for the king's soul. Everyone's part of this, from priests to potters. You think about the scale of it. Memphis, Thebes, every village along the Nile all hushed for 10 days. It's like the whole country's holding its breath, and you're caught in the exhale. You smirk, thinking, bet someone's kid is whispering about that. One time, Dad dropped a pot. Let's zoom into the ritual's heart. After mummification, there's the opening of the mouth ceremony, where priests touch the mummy's face with tools to wake its senses for the afterlife. You picture it a torchlit chamber, the king's sarcophagus, gleaming priests moving like shadows. Normally they'd chant, but now they're silent, their tools tapping stone with the lightest clinks. You wonder if it feels less powerful without the words, or maybe more like the gods lean closer to hear. You imagine the king's spirit stirring, ready to eat, drink, and rule in the afterlife. Hope he likes eternal beer, you think, grinning. The silence shapes everything. Even the funeral procession, usually a spectacle of wails and music, is muted. You envision the king's body carried to his tomb, thousands lining the route, their heads bowed. No drums, no hymns, just footsteps in the Nile's faint lap. It's haunting, like a dream where sound's been stolen. You feel it as you walk the weight of a kingdom's grief. The Silent King's rites aren't just about him. They're about Egypt, proving its devotion, its ability to bend to a god's will. You pass a statue of Anubis, his jackal eyes glinting, and you swear he's judging your every step. You wander deeper into the city, the stars above like a map of the Duat. The rituals, you realize, are Egypt's way of cheating death, of making the king immortal. But the silence, that's something else. It's a test, a mirror held up to the living. You think about the priests, their hands steady despite the pressure. You think about the people, their lives paused for a king they'll never meet. It's a strange kind of unity, fragile but real. You pause by a canal, it's water still, and catch your reflection. Wonder if I'd keep quiet for 10 days, you muse. Probably not, you'd be humming by day 2. The temple district's behind you now, but its presence lingers. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market still gross a reminder of Egypt's quirky, vivid life. The Silent King's rites are part of that life, a blend of faith, fear, and sheer stubbornness. You're starting to see why the silence matters. It's not just about the king, but about Egypt itself, a kingdom that thrives on order, even in chaos. You take a deep breath, the air tasting of sand and time, and keep walking, ready to unravel more of this quiet mystery. You're still wandering Memphis, the Nile's quiet ripples, your only companion under a star-strewn sky. The city's silence feels thicker now, like a fog you can taste as the Silent King's 10-day decree holds Egypt in its grip. You're diving deeper tonight, peeling back the spiritual weight of this hush, why it matters to a people who see gods in every shadow and hear omens in every breeze. The air carries a faint whiff of incense, and you can't help but feel the universe is listening. You smirk, thinking, if I hum a tune, will Osiris send me a cease and desist? You've left the temple district behind, but its echoes linger as you tread a sandy path toward a cluster of shrines. These smaller altars tucked between homes are where ordinary Egyptians pray, leaving offerings of bread or feathers. You pause at one, its stone worn smooth by countless hands, and notice a single lotus flower, wilting but fresh. The silence here isn't just absence, it's reverence, a bridge to the divine. You're starting to sense why the Silent King's decree wasn't just a rule, but a cosmic necessity, a way to keep the gods happy and the world spinning. You imagine the king's spirit, his Ka, gliding through the Duat, and you wonder if this quiet is Egypt's way of cheering him on without making a sound. Let's unpack the spiritual side. In ancient Egypt, death wasn't an end but a doorway. The Silent King as a god king didn't just die, he ascended, joining Ra in the sky or Osiris in the underworld. Historians note that Egyptians believed the afterlife mirrored this world with fields, feasts, and even bureaucracy. Yep, paperwork in eternity. The 10-day silence, a mainstream fact tied to this pharaoh, was meant to ease his transition. You picture priests teaching that noise, shouts, songs, even laughter could snag his soul like a fish in a net, trapping it among the living. You wince, imagining the king's ghost stuck haunting a Memphis tavern. Talk about a bad afterlife, you mutter, grinning. But why 10 days? Here's where it gets heavy. You crouch by the shrine, tracing a carved ankh, the symbol of life. Egyptians saw the world as a balanced mat where order fought chaos. A pharaoh's death tipped that balance, and the silence was a way to restore it. You envision the gods Anubis, Thoth, Isis watching from their starry thrones, judging Egypt's devotion. The 10 days you're learning align with the early stages of mummification when the body's most vulnerable. Any sound might disrupt the spells protecting the king's Ka, leaving him defenseless against underworld demons. You chuckle, picturing a demon whining, I can't work with all this chatter. But for Egyptians, this was no joke. Silence was survival. Now a quirky tidbit, some fringe texts suggest the silence wasn't just for the king, but for the gods themselves. The idea was that Ra, the sun god, needed quiet to focus on guiding the king's soul through the Duat's 12 gates, one per hour of the night. You raise an eyebrow, imagining Ra squinting at a cosmic map, muttering, can't hear myself think with all this noise? It's a wild theory, but it tracks with Egypt's belief that gods were hands-on, meddling in mortal affairs. You glance at the sky, half expecting Ra's solar bark to sail by, but it's just stars twinkling like they know something you don't. Historians still argue whether the silence's spiritual role was about faith or fear. Some say it was pure devotion, a collective prayer to ensure the king's immortality. Others think it was rooted in dread of divine wrath of a botched afterlife that could curse Egypt with plagues or drought. You ponder this as you pass a house, its door ajar, a faint glow inside. You imagine a family whispering prayers silently, of course, terrified a single word might doom their king. The silence, you realize, is a spiritual tightrope balancing hope and terror. You feel it too, like a hum in your bones, urging you to keep quiet. You keep walking the path curving toward the desert's edge. The Nile's behind you now, but its presence lingers, a reminder of Egypt's lifeblood. You think about Mahat again, that delicate order. The Silent King's decree wasn't just about his soul, it was about Egypt proving it could hold the line against chaos. You pass a statue of Isis, her wings spread, her stone eyes glinting. She's the goddess of magic, and you bet she's got a hand in this, silence weaving spells to keep the king safe. You nod to her, half joking. Don't zap me for thinking too loud. Okay, let's zoom out. Egypt's spiritual world is a tapestry of God's spells and symbols, all woven into daily life. You notice a kid's drawing in the sand, a crude boat, maybe the king's solar bark. Even children understand the stakes. The silence you're starting to see is Egypt's way of aligning itself with the cosmos, a collective act of faith. You imagine priests in temples tracing silent spells. Remember those air doodles, their fingers carving invisible glyphs. You wonder if the gods really hear them, or if it's all for show. Either way, it's working. Egypt's still standing, isn't it? You pause by a dune, the sand cool under your feet. The silence feels different here, vast, like it could swallow you whole. You think about the people of Memphis, their lives paused for this spiritual marathon. Farmers, weavers, even the guy selling that crocodile dung sunscreen. Still gross, they're all in this, bound by belief. You smirk, imagining a baker mouthing, "Can I yell about my bread yet?" But the devotion's real. The silence is their offering, a gift to a king who's half man, half god, and wholly gone. You feel a pang of respect mixed with awe at how they pull it off. The stars wheel overhead, and you sense time slipping forward. The Silent King's soul is out there, navigating gates, dodging serpents, or whatever the Duat throws at him. You picture him crowned and proud, stepping into eternity. The silence, you realize, is Egypt's way of holding the door open, of saying, "We've got you." It's a spiritual act, but it's also human, flawed, fragile, and fiercely hopeful. You take a deep breath, the air tasting of sand and stars, and keep moving, ready to see how this quiet shapes the city next. You're weaving through the heart of Memphis, the city's silence pressing against you like a warm, heavy blanket. The Nile glimmers faintly in the distance, its ripples catching starlight, but here, mud brick homes and dim oil lamps paint a quieter scene. The Silent King's 10-day decree has hushed Egypt, and you're watching the people of Memphis wrestle with this unnatural stillness, their daily lives bent under a pharaoh's final whim. The air smells of sun-baked clay and faintly sour beer, and you can feel the weight of unspoken thoughts piling up. You smirk, thinking, if I trip and yell, will the gods send me a divine detention slip? You pause by a row of homes, their wooden shutters closed, though faint shadows flicker inside. These are Memphis's people, potters, traders, parents, kids, all caught in the same strange net. You imagine them gathered around low tables, passing bowls of lentils in silence, their eyes darting as if Anubis himself might pop in to enforce the rules. The quiet isn't just a mandate. It's a test, a marathon of restraint. You picture a sandal maker, his tools idle, desperate to whistle a tune, but clenching his jaw instead. Bet he's mentally composing a protest song, you think, grinning. This silence forces everyone inward, and you wonder who's thriving in the hush and who's teetering on the edge. Let's ground this. Memphis around 1200 BCE is Egypt's pulsing capital, a sprawl of tens of thousands from highborn scribes to laborers hauling reeds. Historians confirm it was the heart of trade and worship, its streets alive with the clatter of carts and the chants of priests. But when the silent king died, that heart skipped a beat. The 10-day silence, a documented quirk of this pharaoh, shut down markets, muted festivals, and turned the city into a ghost of itself. You wander past a market square, usually a riot of haggling and donkey brays now abandoned. Stalls are draped in cloth, their baskets of dates and figs gathering dust. You mutter, tough week to be a fruit vendor. The silence lands differently across the city's layers. You spot a gaggle of kids by a wall scratching stick figures in the dirt. Normally they'd be tearing through the streets, shrieking loud enough to wake a mummy, but now they're muted, their laughter trapped. One boy catches your eye, his face tight like he's afraid you'll snitch for a stifled giggle. You give him a quick nod, hoping to ease the tension, but he just hunches lower. It tugs at you. Kids shouldn't carry this kind of weight. Yet for them, the silence is a lesson. The king is divine, and divinity demands obedience. You imagine their mothers hissing without sound somehow quiet. Or the gods will hear spooky parenting at its finest. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some obscure records suggest Memphis locals invented a makeshift silent code during the 10 days. Not proper sign language, but a system of gestures, tilted heads, finger taps, or a slow blink to say, "Come back later." You raise an eyebrow, picturing two neighbors chatting across an alley with dramatic eyebrow wiggles like they're auditioning for a spy flick. It's a fringe idea, but it tracks. Egyptians were resourceful, and 10 days without words would spark some ingenuity. You test it giving a double finger snap to a stray dog lounging nearby. It yawns and ignores you. Guess I'm no secret agent, you think, chuckling softly. Historians still argue whether the silence bonded Memphis or fractured it. Some say it forged unity, a shared act of reverence that tied the city to its fallen king. Others argue it stirred resentment, especially among the working poor who couldn't afford to stall their lives. You ponder this as you pass a brewer's shop, its vats silent, no yeasty aroma in the air. The brewer, a wiry woman with coal-smudged eyes, leans against her door, staring at the ground. You bet she's tallying lost sales, maybe cursing the king in her head. Silently, of course. The silence you're starting to see is a prism. It reflects devotion for some, irritation for others. You drift deeper into a humbler quarter, where homes are cramped, their walls pitted by years of desert wind. These are the laborers, the unsung muscle of Memphis, who quarry stone and thresh barley. The silence stings them most. You imagine a bricklayer, his kiln cold, unable to shout orders to his crew or barter for supplies. His family's probably rationing flatbread, their stomachs rumbling in the quiet. You smirk, thinking, bet he's planning the loudest tavern brawl ever once this is over. But for now, he endures because defying a god king means risking more than just a fine. It's tempting divine wrath. Let's widen the lens. The silence isn't just Memphis, it's all of Egypt, from Alexandria's shores to Thebes' temples. But as the capital, Memphis bears the brunt, its role as spiritual and political hub, amplifying the decree's impact. You think about the city's heartbeat, the temple of Ptah, the royal palace, the docks heaving with grain. The silent king's death rattled that heart, and the silence is its attempt to steady itself or mask the tremors. You pass a pair of scribes, their reed pens stilled, their usual arguments about tax records muted. Even they, Egypt's storytellers, are gagged by the decree. You wonder what secrets they're scribbling in the dark, what truths the silence buries. You pause by a narrow canal, its water glassy mirroring a sky thick with stars. The silence feels denser here, like it's seeped into the stones. You think about the people you've passed, the kids, the brewer, the bricklayer. They're not just complying, they're adapting, finding ways to exist in this enforced hush. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market, still revolting, forever revolting, a nod to how Egyptians roll with the punches, even the weird ones. The silence tests their mettle, pushing them to their limits, but not breaking them. You respect their tenacity, though you'd probably be muttering complaints by day 4. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a weaver, her hands idle, sitting by her loom in a dim room. She can't sing to pass the time, can't call to her sister across the courtyard. Instead, she traces patterns in the dust, her fingers restless. You picture her husband, a fisherman, staring at his nets, unable to hawk his catch. Their kids huddle nearby, drawing silent games in the dirt. This family, like thousands, is holding it together, their devotion or fear keeping them in line. You wonder what they dream of in the quiet. Freedom. The king's safe passage, or just the chance to yell again. You grin, thinking I'd bet on the yelling. The night grows deeper, the air cooler, and you feel Memphis breathing slow and strained under the decree's weight. The silent king's presence looms, his final command shaping every glance, every careful step. You're starting to see the city as a living mosaic, its people fragments of color and grit. The silence, for all its tension, binds them, if only for these 10 days. You pass a small shrine, its lone candle flickering, and nod to it, a gesture of respect for their endurance. You take a deep breath, the air sharp with dust and time, and keep moving, ready to shadow the priest next and see how they orchestrate this silent storm. You're gliding through the shadowed heart of Memphis, the city's silence pressing against you like a warm, heavy tide. The Nile's faint shimmer lingers in the distance, but here the temple district rises around you, its sandstone walls glowing faintly under a star-dusted sky. The silent king's 10-day decree holds Egypt in a breathless hush, and tonight you're trailing the priests, the enigmatic figures, steering this quiet morning with precision and secrecy. Their role is more than ceremony, it's a delicate dance of power cloaked in incense and shadow. The air carries the sharp tang of myrrh and the cool bite of stone. And you smirk, thinking, if I cough, will these guys summon a jackal-headed bouncer to escort me out? You pause outside the Temple of Ptah, its towering columns looming like ancient sentinels, each one carved with hieroglyphs that seem to whisper in the torchlight. Inside, priests move with ghostly grace, their linen robes brushing the floor in near-silent ripples. These are Egypt's elite, the keepers of sacred knowledge, tasked with bridging the mortal world and the divine. The silent king's death has set their world ablaze, not with chaos, but with purpose. They're the conductors of a cosmic orchestra, ensuring the king's soul hits every note on its journey to the Duat. You imagine one priest, his shaved head gleaming, mentally muttering, "One wrong step, and we're all demoted to papyrus shredders." The thought makes you grin, but you keep it quiet just in case. Let's step into their realm. Priests in ancient Egypt were more than spiritual guides. They were polymaths, blending astronomy, medicine, and politics into their sacred duties. Historians confirm their influence rivaled the pharaohs, their council shaping everything from war to wheat quotas. During the Silent King's mourning, they're the architects of the 10-day silence, a documented peculiarity of this pharaoh's passing. You picture them fanning out across Memphis, their ebony staffs tapping stone, their kohl-rimmed eyes scanning for any hint of defiance. No chants, no hymns, just muted rituals to shepherd the king's ka through the underworld's trials. You wonder how they cope without their usual litanies. Bet they're nursing silent migraines you murmur, imagining the strain of focusing without a sound. Their core mission is mummification and soul guidance, a process as intricate as it is sacred. You edge closer to the temple's side gate, catching a whiff of natron's salty bite and the cloying sweetness of resin from the embalming chambers. Priests oversee every detail, drying the king's body with salt, wrapping it in linen strips and placing amulets to ward off underworld dangers. The silence makes it surreal. Normally they'd chant to Osiris or invoke Ra's protection, but now their lips are sealed, their prayers trapped in their minds. You envision a priest, his hands steady despite the pressure, tucking a jade scarab over the king's heart, his eyes darting to the shadows as if Anubis might critique his technique. You wince at the stakes. One slip, and the king's soul could be lost in the Duat's bureaucratic maze. Talk about eternal paperwork, you think, chuckling. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some obscure texts hint that the priests use silent oracles during the 10 days. Instead of voicing prophecies, they'd interpret signs: swirling incense smoke, the flicker of a lamp, or the shadow of a passing hawk, to gauge the king's progress in the afterlife. You raise an eyebrow, picturing a priest staring at a curling wisp of smoke, like it's a divine DM from Thoth. It's a fringe theory, but it aligns with Egypt's obsession with omens, where every gust of wind could be a god's whisper. You glance at a nearby brazier, its flame dancing lazily, and wonder if it's spelling out a message. Probably just says, "Mind your own business." You mutter, nodding to it anyway, just to be safe. Historians still argue whether the priest's enforcement of the silence was purely devotional or a calculated power play. Some say it was about ensuring the king's safe passage, believing earthly noise could jam the god's cosmic signal. Others suspect it was a way to flex control, silencing potential unrest, while the throne sat vulnerable. You ponder this as you trace the temple's outer wall, its stone cool under your fingers. The priests you're starting to see are jugglers balancing faith and ambition. You imagine one in a hidden chamber burning a papyrus with coded orders, his face a mask. The silence cloaks their maneuvers, and you're not sure if that's holy devotion or just masterful chess. You keep moving, staying in the temple's shadow to avoid drawing attention. The priest's influence radiates like heat. You pass a smaller shrine, its altar heaped with silent offerings, flatbread lotus petals, a single copper ring. A lone priest stands watch, his gaze sharp enough to cut stone, as if he can hear your heartbeat. You sidestep him, thinking, "No thanks, I'm not signing up for a divine polygraph." The silence you're learning is the priest's greatest tool, amplifying their authority. They're not just grieving the king, they're dictating how Memphis grieves down to the smallest gesture. It's a masterclass in control, wrapped in the guise of piety. Let's widen the frame. The priest's power stems from their monopoly on the divine. They chart the stars, predict the Nile's floods, and speak for gods like Isis and Horus. During the 10 days, they're at their zenith, their rituals rippling from Memphis to Heliopolis and beyond. You picture priests in every major city performing silent rites, their fingers tracing invisible spells. Remember those air glyphs from the rites? The Silent King's decree is their canvas, and they're painting a masterpiece of order. You imagine a high priest in a torchlit chamber, his eyes gleaming as he plans the next pharaoh's coronation. His silence louder than any proclamation. You wander deeper into the district, the temples growing grander, their courtyards vast but eerily still. The silence feels honed here, sharpened by the priest's will. You think about the people of Memphis, the baker, the fisherman, the kids scratching games in the dirt. They're all under the priest's invisible yoke, their lives paused for this divine spectacle. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market? Still vile, always vile, a nod to how Egypt blends the sacred with the bizarre. The priests navigate that blend, turning silence into a sermon that echoes across the city. You admire their finesse even if you'd probably whisper a sarcastic quip by now. Zoom in on their human side. You imagine a young priest barely past his training standing in the embalming chamber. His hands tremble as he places a falcon amulet on the king's chest, his mind racing with the weight of eternity. He can't chant for courage, can't ask his mentor for guidance, the silence isolates him. Yet he persists, driven by duty or fear or both. You picture an older priest, his face lined with years of service, watching from the shadows, his silence a mix of pride and calculation. These men are human flawed, yet they carry Egypt's spiritual weight. You wonder what they dream of in the quiet glory redemption, or just a nap. You grin, betting on the nap. The night deepens, the stars spinning above like a celestial map. You feel the priest's presence, their rituals thrumming beneath the city's hush. The silent king's soul is out there battling serpents or bartering with gods in the Duat, and the priests are his silent navigators. You pause by a temple gate, its lintel carved with ankhs and lotus blooms. The silence, you realize, isn't just about the king, it's about Egypt, proving its devotion with the priest as its architects. You take a deep breath, the air thick with incense and ancient dust, and keep walking, ready to descend into the tombs next where the silence carves its deepest mark. You're slipping away from the temple district, the faint hum of Memphis fading as you follow a winding path into the desert's embrace. The silent king's 10-day decree still cloaks Egypt in a profound hush, and tonight you're descending into his tomb, a labyrinth of stone and secrets crafted to cradle a god-king for eternity. The air is crisp, laced with the gritty scent of sand and distant offerings, and the silence feels like a living thing, sharp and unyielding. You smirk, thinking, if I stub my toe and curse, will the underworld slap me with a noise violation? The path dips toward the necropolis where cliffs loom under a sky blazing with stars. You're nearing the Valley of the Kings, or somewhere like it. Let's keep it vague, a place where the dead hold court, and the living tread lightly. The tomb's entrance gapes ahead, a shadowed portal framed by weathered limestone, its lintel etched with solar discs, cobras, and eyes that seem to follow you. A chill crawls up your spine, not from the desert's cool breath, but from the weight of what lies below. This isn't just a grave. It's a gateway to the Duat, packed with symbols to guide the silent king's soul through eternity. You imagine workers sealing it days ago, their hammers stilled to honor the decree. Bet they were terrified of dropping a chisel, you mutter, grinning. You step inside, ducking under the low entrance, and the world shifts. The air turns cool, heavy with the scent of stone and time. Torches sputter along the corridor, their light dancing across walls painted with gods and stars. Historians confirm that tombs like this were marvels built over decades with precision that rivals the pyramids. The silent king's tomb is a masterpiece, its walls a tapestry of silent symbols. Ankhs for life, scarabs for rebirth, jackals for Anubis, the guardian of the dead. You trace a carved lotus, its edges sharp under your fingers, and feel the silence as a force like the tomb itself is listening. You wonder if the king's Ka is here, gliding past, inspecting its new home. Hope he approves of the decor, you think, chuckling. The corridor slopes deeper each step, pulling you further from the living world. You pass a mural of the king offering to Osiris, his hands raised, his face calm but commanding. These images aren't mere art, they're spells woven to ensure his soul's safe passage. You picture artisans painting them years ago, their brushes silent even then as if anticipating this moment. The 10-day silence, a documented oddity of this pharaoh, amplifies the tomb's purpose. No chants echo here, no prayers pierce the hush, just the king's legacy carved in stone. You imagine his spirit reading these walls like a map navigating the Duat's trials. Better not get lost, you whisper half joking, half hoping Anubis isn't taking notes. Here's a quirky tidbit some fringe Egyptologists suggest: the tomb's symbols drew power from the silence itself. The theory goes that sound, any sound, even a whisper, could disrupt their magic like static on a divine radio. The 10-day hush then was a kind of cosmic charger, energizing the carvings to shield the king from underworld threats. You raise an eyebrow, picturing a hieroglyph pulsing faintly like a sacred glow stick. It's a stretch, but it fits Egypt's belief that words and sounds held tangible power. You glance at a carved ibis Thoth's sacred bird and wonder if it's buzzing with silent energy. Probably not, but you give it a cautious nod just to cover your bases. Historians still argue whether the tomb's silent symbols were about spiritual purity or royal vanity. Some say the hush was essential, letting the carvings work their magic without interference, ensuring the king's safe journey. Others see it as a power move away to make his tomb a monument, to control bending even the afterlife to his will. You ponder this as you enter a chamber, its walls dense with spells from the Book of the Dead, incantations against serpents' traps and cosmic bureaucrats. The silence, you realize, is the tomb's final guardian, a shield for the king's eternity. You imagine priests sealing this place, their eyes sharp with purpose or maybe dread of botching the job. You keep descending the corridor, narrowing the air, growing denser. You pass a false door, a stone slab carved to let the king's soul slip between worlds. It's silent, but you swear it hums with intent, like a portal waiting for its cue. You think about the treasures buried here: golden masks, alabaster vases, chariots for celestial joyrides. They're all hushed, waiting for a king who'll never touch them. You picture the workers who placed them, their hands trembling, their breaths held to avoid even a sigh. Bet one of them swiped a shiny bauble and prayed Anubis was napping, you think, smirking. The silence makes every act feel monumental, every choice etched in eternity. Let's zoom out. Tombs like this were Egypt's ultimate flex proof of a pharaoh's divinity and a kingdom's ingenuity. The silent king's tomb, crafted over decades, was a labor of thousands quarrymen, cutting stone artists, mixing pigments, priest blessing every slab. The silence now is their final offering, a tribute to a man who was both God and mortal. You imagine Memphis above its people, muted their lives, mirroring this underground stillness. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market, still disgusting. Always disgusting, a reminder of how Egypt wove the earthly into the divine. This tomb does the same, its silence a bridge between worlds, a whisper of immortality. You reach the sarcophagus chamber, a cavernous space where the king's stone coffin gleams, its lid carved with protective wings and solar eyes. The silence here is absolute, like the world has paused to bow. You trace the walls covered in spells to fend off underworld demons, snakes with names like Fire Spitter and Bone Crusher. You wonder what the king's soul is facing now: Gates trials, or maybe a stern lecture from Osiris about his tax policies. The symbols around you are his armor, their power tied to this hush. You feel a mix of awe and unease. This place is stunning, but it's also a cage, a king locked in stone and silence for all time. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine the artisans who carved these walls, their fingers blistered, their eyes strained by torchlight. They worked in silence, not just now, but for years, knowing their art would outlive them. You picture a priest, his robe stained with resin, placing a final amulet in the sarcophagus, his hands steady despite the weight of eternity. These people, like the weaver or the fisherman back in Memphis, are threads in Egypt's tapestry, their silence a testament to their faith or their fear. You wonder what they felt sealing this tomb. Pride relief, or just exhaustion. You grin, betting they dreamed of a loud, drunken party once the job was done. The night outside feels like a distant memory, the stars buried under layers of rock. You linger in the chamber, the silence pressing against your chest. You think about the priests who bless this place, their silent rites weaving spells into the stone. You think about the people above their lives shaped by a tomb they'll never enter. The silence you're starting to see isn't just about the king, it's about Egypt, proving its devotion, its ability to defy time itself. You take a deep breath, the air cool and faintly stale, and turn back ready to surface soon, and see how the commoners endure this same quiet weight. You've climbed back to the surface, the tomb's heavy silence, lingering in your bones as you step into Memphis's quiet streets. The desert's edge fades behind you, and the city's mud brick homes glow faintly under a moon that feels too bright for such stillness. The Silent King's 10-day decree still holds Egypt in its grip, and tonight you're walking among the commoners, farmers, weavers, tavern keepers, watching how they endure this enforced hush. The air smells of straw and cooling earth, and you can't help but smirk, thinking, if I whistle right now, will the whole neighborhood snitch to Anubis? You're in a working-class quarter where alleys twist like veins and laundry sways on ropes forgotten in the quiet. These are the people who keep Egypt running, the ones who plow fields and fire kilns. Yet now they're paused, their lives tethered to a dead king's whim. You pause by a low wall, watching a family through an open door. They sit around a clay lamp, sharing flatbread in silence, their faces a mix of patience and strain. You imagine the mother, her hands calloused from grinding grain, longing to scold her kids but biting her tongue instead. Bet she's got a mental list of every noise she'll make on day 11. You think, grinning. Let's set the scene. Memphis around 1200 BCE is a city of layers, nobles and villas, priests and temples, and commoners like these who outnumber them all. Historians note that Egypt's economy leaned on its laborers whose grain and goods fed the kingdom's wealth. The 10-day silence, a documented hallmark of the Silent King's death, hits them hardest, halting their work and wages. You wander past a potter's yard, its wheels still clay lumps drying in the heat. The potter, a wiry man with dust-streaked arms, stares at his tools like they've betrayed him. You mutter, tough gig, when your king decides silence is the new currency. The silence reshapes daily life in ways you can feel. You pass a cluster of women by a well, their water jars balanced on hips, their usual chatter replaced by quick nods. Normally, this spot would hum with gossip, whose cow ate, whose reads, who's eyeing the new scribe. But now it's a pantomime of glances. You picture one woman, her eyes sharp, dying to spill about a neighbor's shady grain deal, but stuck gesturing instead. It's almost funny, like a silent comedy, but there's an edge to it. These women, like everyone, know the stakes break the decree, and you're not just risking a fine, you're tempting the god's wrath. You wince, thinking I'd probably whisper one snarky comment and regret it forever. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some fringe accounts suggest commoners coped by inventing silent games to pass the time. Kids especially would draw grids in the dirt for mute versions of Senate, a board game, using pebbles and finger taps to signal moves. You raise an eyebrow, imagining a group of children hunched over a makeshift board, their giggles swallowed, their eyes darting like spies. It's a charming idea, and it tracks Egyptians loved their games, and 10 days of quiet would demand creativity. You spot a kid nearby scratching lines in the sand and wonder if he's playing Silent Senate. You toss him a pebble, half expecting a secret handshake. He just blinks, unimpressed. Tough crowd, you think, chuckling. Historians still argue whether the silence united the commoners or frayed their patience. Some say it fostered solidarity, a shared sacrifice for their divine king. Others think it bred quiet resentment, especially among those scraping by who couldn't afford to pause their hustle. You ponder this as you pass a tavern, its door barred. No clink of beer mugs or drunken songs spilling out. The tavern keeper, a burly woman with a scar on her cheek, sweeps her stoop in silence, her broom's rhythm the only sound. You bet she's tallying lost tips, maybe cursing the king in her head without a peep, naturally. The silence you're starting to see is a test of endurance, and not everyone's passing with a smile. You keep walking the streets, narrowing as you dive deeper into the laborer's world. Here homes are smaller, patched with straw, and hope their roofs sagging under years of sun. You imagine a farmer inside one, his hands idle, staring at a pile of unplanted seeds. His fields wait, his oxen stand unyoked, and his kids are probably hungry. The silence isn't just inconvenient, it's a threat to survival. You picture him clenching his fists, willing the days to pass, knowing that defying the decree could bring worse than hunger, divine retribution. You smirk, thinking, bet he's planning the loudest harvest chant ever once this is over. For now, though, he waits, his faith or fear keeping him in line. Let's zoom out. The silence blankets all of Egypt, but in Memphis, the capital, it's a pressure cooker. Commoners, unlike priests or nobles, can't retreat to temples or villas. They're out here living the decree in the open. You think about their role in Egypt's machine, the farmers feeding the cities, the weavers clothing the priests, the potters shaping the jars for offerings. The silent king's death has stalled that machine, and the silence is its creaking gears. You pass a group of laborers, their tools stacked against a wall, their faces unreadable. They're not just obeying, they're surviving their silence, a fragile shield against chaos. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a basket maker, her fingers still sitting by her reeds in a dim hut. She can't call to her apprentice, can't hum to ease the boredom. Instead, she braids patterns in her mind, her hands twitching with pent-up skill. Her husband, a quarryman, stares at the ceiling, his muscles aching for work. Their daughter, maybe 10, draws silent shapes in the dirt outside her usual songs locked away. This family, like countless others, is holding it together, their devotion or dread keeping them quiet. You wonder what they dream of in this hush. The king's glory, a full belly, or just the chance to shout again. You grin, betting on the shouting. You pause by a canal, its water still reflecting a sky thick with stars. The silence feels heavier here, like it's sunk into the earth. You think about the commoners you've seen, the potter, the tavern keeper, the kid with his pebble. They're not just enduring, they're adapting, finding ways to exist in this enforced quiet. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market still revolting eternally? So a nod to how Egyptians bend even the absurd into survival. The silence tests their grit, pushing them to the brink, but not over it. You respect their resilience, though you'd probably be muttering rebellion by now. The night deepens, and you feel Memphis breathing slow and strained under the decree's weight. The silent king's shadow looms large, his final command, shaping every glance, every careful step. You're starting to see the city as a living mosaic, its commoners, the vibrant, weathered tiles. The silence, for all its hardship, binds them, if only for these 10 days. You take a deep breath, the air cool and earthy, and keep moving, ready to trace the king's legacy, next to see how his quiet decree echoes beyond the grave. You're threading through the quiet veins of Memphis, the city's silence now, a constant companion like a pulse you can't quite shake. The Nile's faint shimmer catches your eye through gaps in the mud brick homes, its waters reflecting a sky thick with stars. The silent king's 10-day decree still binds Egypt in an invisible chain, and tonight you're chasing the echoes of his legacy, unraveling how his influence ripples beyond his death and this haunting hush. The air smells of dust straw and the faint sweetness of overripe dates, and you smirk thinking, if I mutter a joke, will the king's spirit send me a ghostly cease and desist papyrus? You've wandered into a bustling quarter? At least it would be bustling if not for the decree where artisans' workshops lean against the grander walls of nobles' villas. The villas' whitewashed facades gleam under moonlight, their shutters sealed tight while the workshops sit dark, their tools abandoned. The silent king's death has stilled the city, but his life, his reign, his vision still breathes in its stones, its canals, its very rhythm. You pause by a sculptor's yard where half-carved statues stand like frozen sentinels, their surfaces etched with the king's cartouche, his name, a seal of eternity. You imagine the sculptor, his chisel idol, staring at these stones, wondering if the king's shadow will outlast his own. Bet he's hoping his work gets a nod in the afterlife, you think, grinning. The silence you're starting to sense is just one thread in the vast tapestry of the king's enduring presence. Let's dive into his legacy. The silent king ruling around 1200 BCE was a colossus of his time, though we'll keep his name shrouded to savor the mystery. Historians confirm he presided over a golden era where Egypt's coffers swelled with grain and gold, its borders held firm against restless neighbors, and its temples touched the sky. His 10-day silence, a documented peculiarity of his passing, is his final flourish, but his life's work shaped the kingdom long before. You picture him in his palace, his golden collar glinting, his voice commanding canals to be dug, obelisks to be raised, and trade routes to be secured. His monuments, from the sprawling temples of Thebes to the statues lining Memphis's avenues, are proof of his ambition, his will to be remembered as both man and God. You pass a half-finished column, its base carved with lotus blooms, and feel his gaze as if he's still watching from some celestial throne. The silence itself is a cornerstone of his legacy, a bold, almost audacious act that sets him apart. You wander past a temple wall, its reliefs vivid, even in the dim light, the king smiting foes, offering incense to Amun, his image frozen in divine triumph. The 10-day hush, you realize, wasn't just about guiding his Ka through the Duat. It was about etching his name into Egypt's soul. By forcing a kingdom to fall silent, he ensured every farmer, every scribe, every child would carry his memory. Their silence a form of worship, a collective bow to his greatness. You imagine a weaver in her silent hut, her loom still thinking of the king who built the temples she'll never enter. Guy's got us all mute, and he's probably sipping celestial beer, you think, chuckling. It's a power move that resonates across centuries, a decree that screams, I am eternal. Here's a quirky tidbit: some fringe texts whisper that the silent king's silence sparked a secretive cult years after his death. These devotees, calling themselves the Order of the Hushed, believed silent rituals brought them closer to the king's divine essence, even granting visions of the Duat. You raise an eyebrow, picturing a group of robed eccentrics gathered in a moonlit grove, sitting in absolute hush, their eyes wide as they commune with the king's spirit. It's like the world's most intense silent retreat, complete with cosmic vibes and zero small talk. The idea is out there, but it fits Egypt's knack for turning royal quirks into spiritual movements. You glance at a small shrine nearby, its lone candle flickering, and wonder if any of those silent weirdos are still out there, meditating in some forgotten cave. Probably not, but you give the shrine a respectful nod just in case. Historians still argue whether the silence was a spiritual triumph or a political masterstroke. Some say it was pure devotion, a sacred pause to ensure the king's soul sailed smoothly through the underworld's gates undisturbed by earthly clamor. Others argue it was a calculated play, a way to unify a kingdom teetering on the edge of succession disputes, silencing nobles and priests who might stir trouble. You ponder this as you pass a grand villa, its courtyard hidden behind high walls. You bet they're scheming behind those shutters, but even the schemers are hushed, their whispers stifled by the king's final command. The silence you're learning is a mirror of his legacy, part faith, part control, all impact. You feel it in the air like a song paused mid-note, waiting for resolution. You keep moving the streets, opening into a broader avenue lined with sycamore trees, their leaves still in the windless night. You think about the king's broader reach, his trade caravans to Punt laden with incense and ebony, his armies that cowed Nubian rebels, his scribes who recorded his every deed on papyrus that's now dust. You pass a canal, its banks thick with silent reeds, and recall how he expanded irrigation, turning arid wastes into fertile fields. His people prospered, but they also revered him with a hint of fear, his divine status a reminder that he was no mere mortal. You imagine a fisherman back then grateful for the king's canals, but nervous under his distant gaze. Bet he raised a cup to the king, then griped about the tax collectors, you think? Smirking, let's zoom out. The Silent King's legacy isn't just Memphis, it's Egypt itself, a kingdom that danced on the edge of chaos and order made under his rule. His silence now is a final act of mastery, a way to carve his name deeper into the land's memory. You picture villages along the Nile, from the delta's marshes to Aswan's cataracts, all hushed for him, their lives woven into his myth. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market, still vile, eternally vile? A nod to how Egypt's people lived vividly even under divine edicts. The king's legacy lives in their resilience, their faith, their ability to endure this quiet trial. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a coppersmith, his forge cold, sitting in his cramped workshop. He can't hammer his wares, can't call to his son to fetch charcoal. Instead, he polishes a finished bracelet, his fingers tracing the king's cartouche etched on its surface, wondering if his own name will fade. His wife, a dye maker, sorts silent bundles of madder root. Her hands stained red, her heart heavy with lost market days. Their daughter, maybe 9, carves a tiny falcon in the dirt outside, dreaming of the king's journey with Horus. This family, like thousands, carries the king's legacy in their silence, their lives a quiet ode to his memory. You wonder what they hope for when the hush lifts. The king's glory? A full granary? Or just the chance to laugh again? You grin, betting on the laughter. You pause by a colossal statue of the king, its stone face serene, its eyes fixed on some eternal horizon. The silence pools around its base, deep and unbroken. You think about the commoners, the priests, the artisans, all shaped by his rule, now bound by his final wish. The Silent King's legacy you're starting to see isn't just in his temples or his laws, but In this moment, this collective pause that forces Egypt to reflect on his reign. You take a deep breath, the air cool and gritty with sand, and keep walking, ready to unravel the court intrigues next, where the silence hides sharper, more dangerous games. You're drifting through the shadowed arteries of Memphis, the city's silence wrapping you like a cloak woven from starlight and secrets. The Nile's faint shimmer peeks through gaps in the tightly packed homes, its waters reflecting a sky blazing with constellations. The Silent King's 10-day decree still holds Egypt in a breathless hush, and tonight you're slipping into the palace's hidden corners, peeling back the layers of court intrigues that bubble beneath this enforced quiet. The air carries the rich scent of cedar, mingled with the sharp tang of intrigue, and you smirk thinking, if I whisper a quip, will the palace walls snitch to Thoth himself? You've entered the royal quarter where the city's hum fades, replaced by the looming presence of the palace. A sprawling fortress of power, its faience-tiled walls glinting like trapped moonlight. The palace is a labyrinth of ambition corridors where nobles trade veiled glances, scribes tally unspoken debts, and queens measure their next move with the precision of a falcon's strike. The Silent King's death has fractured the court's fragile order, and the silence, while a sacred mandate, doubles as a curtain for plots. You pause by a garden gate, its date palms eerily still, and imagine guards pacing in hushed steps, their bronze spears catching starlight, their eyes scanning for betrayal. Bet they're itching to swap rumors about who's gunning for the throne, you think, grinning. The quiet you're starting to sense is less a pause than a stage for silent warfare. Let's plunge into the intrigue. The Silent King's court, even in his prime, was a cauldron of ambition nobles, jockeying for his ear priest, weaving divine agendas and heirs circling like jackals around a fresh kill. Historians confirm that a pharaoh's death often ignited power struggles with succession, rarely a smooth handoff. The 10-day silence, a documented hallmark of this king's passing, is both a shield and a blade in this game. You picture nobles huddled in torchlit chambers, their voices banned, but their minds racing like chariots. The king's heir, perhaps a young prince, his crown still untested, stands at the center of the storm. You imagine a vizier, his linen robe crisp, his eyes narrowed, folding his hands to mask a mind spinning with calculations. The silence, you realize, is a chessboard, every raised eyebrow a gambit, every subtle nod a checkmate. The palace thrums with unspoken tension, its grandeur hiding a pulse of danger. You glide past a colonnade, its lotus-carved columns casting jagged shadows. Inside, you envision a council hall, its tables bare, where nobles once clinked goblets to the king's health, but now convene in secret, their gestures sharp as daggers. The silence demands cunning messages scrawled on papyrus scraps, passed by trusted servants. Coded signals in the tilt of a fan or the clink of a bronze ring against a cup. You picture a noblewoman, her coal-lined eyes gleaming, slipping a turquoise bead to a maid with instructions to deliver a note, midnight lotus pool. Or maybe something bolder like the prince falters. You chuckle thinking, this is like a political thriller, but with more linen and fewer car chases. The silence you're learning doesn't halt intrigue, it refines it, forcing ambition into sharper, quieter forms. Here's a quirky tidbit: some fringe accounts suggest the court developed a secret code during the silence, using adornments to signal loyalties. A lapis scarab pendant might mark allegiance to the prince, while a gold ankh necklace signaled support for a rival noble's claim. You raise an eyebrow, picturing a silent council where nobles' jewelry jingles like a clandestine telegraph, each gem a whispered manifesto. It's a wild notion, but it aligns with Egypt's obsession with symbols. Every amulet, every ring carried weight beyond decoration. You glance at a passing guard, his plain bronze collar offering no clues, and wonder if he's part of the game. Probably not. His scowl suggests he's more annoyed about missing his usual beer ration. Bet he'd trade state secrets for a mug right now, you think, smirking. Historians still argue whether the silence quelled court schemes or fanned their flames. Some say it forced unity, binding the palace to the king's memory and his heirs' claim, a collective act of reverence that stifled dissent. Others see it as a pressure cooker bottling ambition until it seeped out in quiet conspiracies. You ponder this as you skirt a courtyard, its alabaster fountain frozen no ripple to break the hush. The silence you're starting to see is a paradox. It honors the king's divine will, but also cloaks the daggers drawn in his absence. You imagine a high priest lurking nearby, his loyalty torn between the gods, and a cunning noble, his silent prayers doubling as a wager on the throne's next master. You keep moving, the palace's opulence giving way to narrower passages where servants dart like shadows, their eyes averted but their ears wide open. These are the invisible players, cooks, fan-bearers, linen-keepers who overhear every hushed plot, but stay mute decree or no decree. You picture a chambermaid. Her hands calloused, catching a noble's murmured hint, before the silence fell about swaying a general with gold. Now she's silent, but her memory burns, and you wonder what she'll do when the quiet lifts spill the secret or trade it for a better life. Bet she's got enough gossip to topple a dynasty, you think, grinning. The silence binds them all highborn and low, but it can't erase the palace's undercurrent of scheming. Let's zoom out. The court's intrigues mirror Egypt itself, a kingdom perched on the edge of at the divine order, yet always one misstep from chaos. The silent king's death has tipped that balance, and the silence is a fragile levee against a flood of ambition. You think about the stakes. A faltering heir could spark rebellion, a ruthless one could unleash purges. You pass a relief of Horus, his falcon eyes piercing the dark, and feel the gods gaze as if they're watching this drama unfold, maybe chuckling with Ra over cosmic wine. The silence, you realize, is the king's final grasp on a court he can no longer command, a testament to his power, even in death. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a young scribe, his reed pen idle, crouched in a dim alcove. He can't transcribe the council's debates, can't whisper to his friend about the prince's nervous stammer. Instead, he etches silent tallies on a clay shard, tracking which nobles linger too long in shadowed halls. His mother, a seamstress, mends silent linens in their cramped home, her needle flashing her ears, straining for rumors from the palace. Their cousin, a guard, stands at his post, his spear heavy, his mind replaying a noble's cryptic glance. This family, like the courtiers above them, is ensnared in the intrigue's web, their silence both a shield and a shackle. You wonder what they fear most, a coup, a divine curse, or simply backing the wrong player. You grin, betting on the curse. Egyptians don't mess around with angry gods. You pause by a palace wall, its reliefs depicting the king in glory smiting enemies under Ra's rays. The silence feels denser here, like it's guarding secrets carved deeper than stone. You think about the commoners, the priests, the artisans, all shaped by the king's reign, now tangled in this quiet power struggle. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market, still revolting forever. So a reminder of how Egypt's people navigate the absurd with cunning and grit. The court's intrigues you're starting to see are just another layer of that cunning, polished to a lethal edge. You take a deep breath, the air thick with cedar and unspoken plots, and keep moving, ready to explore the god's role next, where the silence takes on a divine cosmic weight. You're weaving through the quiet pulse of Memphis, the city's silence now a familiar weight, like a river stone smoothed by time. The Nile's soft shimmer glints through the maze of homes and temples, its waters catching a sky ablaze with stars. The Silent King's 10-day decree still holds Egypt in a hushed trance. And tonight you're turning your gaze to the gods, pondering how their divine presence and cryptic omens shape this eerie stillness. The air smells of lotus and faintly charred incense, and you smirks, thinking, if I sneeze, will Ra send a solar flare to shush me? You've wandered into a sacred precinct where smaller shrines cluster around the grand temple of a moon, their limestone facades glowing faintly under moonlight. These are the gods' homes, Anubis, Isis, Horus, and more, where mortals seek favor and fear judgment. The silence feels heavier here, as if the deities themselves are leaning in their unseen eyes, tracking every step. You pause by a shrine to Osiris, its altar piled with wilting reeds and a single clay lamp, its flame steady despite the stillness. You imagine priests tending it hours ago, their hands moving in silent reverence, as if a single sound could tip the cosmic balance. Bet they're sweating under those robes, trying not to trip, you think, grinning. Let's dive into the divine. In ancient Egypt, gods weren't distant. They were as real as the Nile, their whims etched in flood stars and falcon flights. Historians confirm that Egyptians saw their world as a tapestry of divine will, with pharaohs as living gods bridging earth and sky. The Silent King's death and his 10-day silence is a cosmic event tied to the god's role in guiding his Ka through the Duat's perils. You picture the gods gathered like a celestial council, Ra steering his solar bark Anubis, weighing the king's heart, Isis weaving protective spells. The silence you're starting to sense is Egypt's offering to them a plea to keep the king's soul safe and the kingdom intact. The god's influence is everywhere, especially now. You wander past a relief of Horus, his falcon head fierce, his spear poised. Egyptians believed omens signaled divine moods. A hawk circling left might mean Horus's blessing, while a sudden dust storm could be Set's wrath. During the silence, you imagine people scanning the sky, desperate for signs. Was that heron's flight a nod from Thoth, or did that flickering star mean Ra's displeasure? You picture a farmer by his silent field, squinting at a cloud shaped vaguely like an ankh, whispering in his head for clarity. Bet he's overanalyzing every breeze, you think, chuckling. The silence amplifies these omens, turning every rustle into a divine post-it note. Here's a quirky tidbit: some fringe texts claim the gods themselves went silent. During the 10 days, their voices paused to focus on the king's journey. Priests supposedly read this in the stars' unusual brightness, or the Nile's uncanny calm, interpreting it as a divine echo of the king's decree. You raise an eyebrow, picturing Ra, Isis, and Anubis in a celestial group chat, agreeing to mute their notifications for a week and a half. It's a wild idea, but it fits Egypt's belief that gods mirrored human acts, especially a pharaoh's. You glance at the sky stars, twinkling like they're in on the joke, and wonder if they're signaling something. Probably just go to bed, but you nod anyway, just in case. Historians still argue whether the silence was a divine mandate or a human projection onto the gods. Some say it was a sacred necessity, ensuring the gods could guide the king's soul without earthly noise clogging their cosmic bandwidth. Others think it was a priestly spin, using divine fear to enforce compliance and stabilize a shaky succession. You ponder this as you pass a shrine to Isis, her winged arms carved in stone, her face serene but unreadable. The gods you're learning are both players and props in this drama, their omens a language the living scramble to decode. You imagine a priest inside, tracing silent spells, his eyes flicking to a candle's flicker for a hint of divine mood. You keep moving the sacred precinct opening into a wider courtyard, where a massive statue of a moon looms, his ram horns curling into the night. The silence here feels vast, like it's stretching to the heavens. You think about how the gods shape the silence's purpose. Ra, the sun god, demands order, and the hush might be Egypt's way of aligning with his rhythm. Anubis, the jackal-headed guide, guards the king's soul, and the silence could be a shield against underworld chaos. Isis, the mother magician, might be weaving spells to protect the king, her magic stronger in this quiet. You picture them all, their divine council in session, and feel a shiver. Egypt's fate hinges on their whims, and the silence is the mortal world's best bet to sway them. Let's zoom out. The gods' role in Egypt is the backbone of its culture, their presence felt in every harvest, every birth, every death. The silent king's decree taps into this, turning silence into a divine dialogue. You imagine villages across Egypt, from the delta's muddy hamlets to Thebes' golden streets, all hush their people, scanning the world for omens, a falling leaf, a snake's path, a dream of ibises. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market, still gross? Always gross, a reminder of how Egypt wove the divine into the everyday, even the absurd. The silence you're starting to see is a collective prayer, a way to court the gods' favor for a king who's now one of them. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a midwife, her hand still sitting in her dim hut. She can't chant blessings for new mothers, can't call to her apprentice for herbs. Instead, she burns silent incense, watching it smoke for signs of Isis's approval. Her husband, a boatman, ties his skiff in silence, his eyes on the Nile's ripples, praying, Hapi sends a good flood. Their son, barely 10, carves a tiny ankh in the dirt, hoping Osiris sees his faith. This family, like thousands, lives the silence as a divine test, their every act a plea for the gods' mercy. You wonder what they see in the omens: a safe king, a strong harvest, or just a quiet night. You grin, betting on the harvest. You pause by a temple gate, its lintel carved with stars and cobras. The silence feels like a bridge here, linking earth to the divine. You think about the commoners, the priests, the courtiers, all shaped by the gods' invisible hands, now bound by this quiet vigil. The silent king's legacy, you realize, leans on these deities, his silence a gamble, that the gods will honor his soul and Egypt's faith. You take a deep breath, the air cool and laced with incense, and keep walking, ready to watch the artisans next, where the silence carves its mark into their craft. You're wandering the quieter edges of Memphis, the city's silence now, a deep current pulling you along like the Nile itself. The river's faint glimmer weaves through the gaps between mud brick homes, its waters mirroring a sky thick with stars that seem to pulse with secrets. The silent king's 10-day decree still cloaks Egypt in a hush, and tonight you're shadowing the artisans, stone carvers, painters, jewelers, watching how they carve tributes under this mandate of quiet. The air smells of chalky dust and drying paint, and you smirk, thinking, if I drop a chisel, will Horus send a hawk to scold me? You've drifted into an artisan's quarter where workshops huddle close their open fronts, revealing half-finished works. A limestone relief, a string of faience beads, a wooden shabti figure with one arm yet to be carved. These are the hands that shape Egypt's glory, turning raw stone and metal into gods and kings. The silence weighs heavily here, stilling hammers and brushes, forcing craftsmen to work with a precision that feels almost sacred. You pause by a carver's stall, its floor dusted with limestone grit, and spot a half-etched scene of the silent king offering to Ra. The carver, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, stares at his tools, his face a mix of focus and frustration. Bet he's itching to curse this quiet you think grinning. Let's dive into their world. Artisans in ancient Egypt were the backbone of its visual legacy, their work adorning temples, tombs, and palaces. Historians confirm they were skilled laborers, often organized in guilds, their lives a blend of craft and devotion. The Silent King's 10-day silence, a documented quirk of his passing, has halted their usual rhythm. No clinking chisels, no shouted instructions, just muted labor to honor the king's soul. You picture a workshop buzzing with silent activity, a painter mixing ochre with water, a goldsmith shaping a pectoral, their movements deliberate as if the gods are peering over their shoulders. You imagine one muttering in his head, "One wrong stroke, and I'm explaining myself to Anubis." The silence you're learning is both a burden and a muse. Their task now is to craft tributes for the king's afterlife amulets. Statues, tomb reliefs, each piece a prayer for his eternal journey. You wander past a painter's bench, where a papyrus lies half-finished, its colors vivid, the king sailing with Osiris, his ka glowing. The painter, a woman with a scar across her knuckle, dips her brush in silence, her eyes flicking to the papyrus as if it might speak. Normally she'd hum or call to her apprentice for more blue, but the decree binds her voice. You wince picturing the strain of creating without sound, like dancing without music. Bet she's got a silent symphony in her head. You think, chuckling. The silence makes every stroke a ritual, every bead a vow. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some fringe sources suggest artisans use the silence to infuse their work with spiritual power, believing quiet labor channeled the gods' focus into their creations. A silent carved scarab, they thought, might glow with divine energy, protecting the king better than a noisy one. You raise an eyebrow, imagining a goldsmith whispering in his mind to a lotus pendant. Come on, soak up that godly vibe. It's a wild notion, but it tracks with Egypt's belief that intent-shaped reality words, sounds, even silence held magic. You glance at a half-carved shabti on a nearby table, its wooden face blank, and wonder if it's buzzing with quiet mojo. Probably not, but you give it a cautious nod just in case. Historians still argue whether the silence elevated the artisan's work or stifled their craft. Some say it forced a deeper focus, making their tributes purer, more divine. Others think it bred frustration as deadlines loomed and tools stayed mute, risking errors in the king's sacred gifts. You ponder this as you pass a jeweler's stall where a string of carnelian beads lies unfinished, their red glow catching the lamplight. The jeweler, an older man with gnarled hands, polishes a bead in silence, his lips tight. You bet he's cursing the decree inwardly, worried his work won't reach the tomb in time. The silence you're starting to see is a crucible forging art under pressure, but threatening to crack those who wield it. You keep moving, the workshops growing smaller, their owners humbler. These are the lesser artisans, the ones who carve minor amulets or paint offering jars, not the elite who sculpt for pharaohs. Their silence is no less profound. You picture a young apprentice, barely 15, sanding a wooden hawk in a dim corner, his hands trembling to avoid a splinter's sound. His master, a grizzled sculptor, watches with narrowed eyes, unable to bark corrections. The boy's work will join the king's tomb, a tiny piece of eternity, and the silence makes it feel monumental. You imagine him thinking, "Don't mess this up, or I'm haunting the Duat myself." You smirk, picturing his nervous focus a kid caught in a divine deadline. Let's zoom out. Artisans are Egypt's unsung poets. Their craft a language of stone, paint, and gold that speaks for the gods and kings. The silent king's decree has turned their work into a silent symphony, each piece a note in his afterlife score. You think about the broader impact from Memphis's workshops to Thebes's quarries. Artisans are crafting and hush their tributes, linking the living to the dead. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market, still vile, forever vile, a nod to how Egypt's people weave the mundane into the sacred. The silence, you realize, is their canvas, transforming routine labor into a divine act. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a bead maker, her fingers nimble, sitting in her cramped workshop. She can't sing to ease the monotony, can't call to her daughter for more clay. Instead, she strings silent turquoise beads, her eyes tracing their flaws, praying they'll guard the king's soul. Her husband, a stonemason, polishes a small obelisk in their courtyard, his chisel still his mind on the grain he can't buy until the silence lifts. Their son, barely 12, sweeps the workshop floor in silence, dreaming of carving his own masterpiece someday. This family, like countless others, carries the king's legacy in their quiet hands, their craft a muted hymn to his eternity. You wonder what they hope for when the hush ends. A divine nod, a full market stall, or just a loud laugh. You grin, betting on the laugh. You pause by a workshop's open door where a painter daubs gold on a coffin panel, his brush steady despite the silence. The scene shows the king with Anubis, their hands joined, a promise of safe passage. The silence feels deeper here, like it's woven into the paint itself. You think about the commoners, the priests, the courtiers, all shaped by the king's reign, now bound by this quiet craft. The silent king's legacy, you're starting to see lives in these artisans, their silent tributes, a bridge to his immortality. You take a deep breath, the air gritty with dust and time, and keep walking, ready to explore the markets next, where the silence reshapes trade in its own peculiar way. You're weaving through the heart of Memphis, the city's silence now a deep tide, tugging at your senses like the Nile's steady pull. The river's faint glow slips through the alleys, its waters mirroring a sky so thick with stars it feels like a divine map. The silent king's 10-day decree still binds Egypt in a hush, and tonight you're wandering the markets, observing how merchants and traders adapt to this enforced stillness, their bustling world muted by a pharaoh's final command. The air smells of sun-warmed straw, overripe figs, and a hint of stale beer. And you smirk, thinking, if I jingle some coins, will send a sandstorm to hush me. You've entered the market district, a maze of stalls and shaded awnings that in normal times would pulse with haggling laughter and the clatter of bronze scales. Now it's a ghost of itself. Stalls draped in cloth baskets of grain, and dates gathering dust, and merchants leaning silently against their counters. You pause by a spice vendor's stall, its sacks of saffron and coriander untouch the vendor, a wiry woman with coal-smudged eyes staring at the empty street. Her hands fidget as if itching to call out her wares, but the decree seals her lips. Bet she's mentally shouting deals to the gods, you think, grinning. The silence, you're learning, is a thief stealing the market's lifeblood, but sparking new ways to survive. Let's dive into the scene. Memphis's markets around 1200 BCE were Egypt's economic engine, where grain linen and exotic goods from Punt fueled a thriving trade network. Historians confirm that merchants from small-time barley sellers to wealthy importers were the city's pulse, their deals feeding temples and homes alike. The Silent King's 10-day silence, a documented oddity of his passing, has choked this pulse, halting sales and bartering. You picture a trader, his table piled with Nubian ivory, gesturing silently to a customer, their negotiation a dance of nods and raised fingers. You imagine him thinking, one wrong move, and I'm eating unsold beads for dinner. The silence, you realize, is both a cage and a challenge, forcing traders to rethink their craft. The market's usual chaos shouts of fresh fish or best linen in Memphis is gone, replaced by a surreal quiet. You wander past a fishmonger's stall, its baskets of dried perch reeking faintly, the vendor using hand signals to offer a deal to a wary buyer. Normally he'd boast about his catch, maybe toss in a tall tale about wrestling a Nile catfish, but now his hands do the talking, tracing numbers in the air. You picture the buyer, a baker with flour-dusted arms, squinting at the gestures, unsure if he's getting a bargain or a scam. Bet they're both cursing this quiet in their heads, you think, chuckling. The silence turns trade into a game of charades where every misunderstanding risks a deal or a grudge. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some fringe accounts suggest merchants developed a silent barter system during the 10 days using prearranged symbols, piles of pebbles-colored cloths, or even arranged fruit to signal prices and terms. You raise an eyebrow, picturing a grain seller stacking 3 dates to mean 2 measures for a deben, while his buyer counters with a single reed for 1 measure, take it or leave it. It's like a mute marketplace Morse code, and it tracks with Egypt's knack for improvisation. Merchants didn't get rich by giving up. You glance at a nearby stall where a trader adjusts a stack of onions in a peculiar pattern, and wonder if it's a code or just boredom. Probably boredom, but you nod anyway, just in case. Historians still argue whether the silence crippled the markets or sharpened traders' wits. Some say it unified merchants in a shared sacrifice, their quiet a nod to the king's divinity. Others think it bred frustration as unsold goods spoiled and debts piled up, pushing some to skirt the decree with clandestine deals. You ponder this as you pass a linen seller's stall, its rolls of fabric pristine but untouched the cellar. A burly man with a scar on his cheek, tallying silent accounts on a clay tablet. You bet he's calculating losses, maybe plotting a midnight barter to save his family's bread. The silence you're starting to see is a crucible forging resilience in some, and desperation in others. You keep moving, the market narrowing into tighter alleys where smaller vendors huddle sellers of clay pots, reed baskets, and cheap amulets. These are the humbler traders scraping by even in good times, and the silence hits them hardest. You picture a basket weaver, her stall a lean-to of palm fronds, arranging her wares in silence, her fingers trembling from hunger. She can't call to passers-by, can't charm a sale with a smile and a story. Her husband, a porter, waits nearby, unable to haul goods for pay. You imagine them exchanging glances, their silent agreement to endure, knowing defiance could bring divine wrath or a priest's whip. Bet they're dreaming of the loudest market day ever, you think. Smirking. Let's zoom out. The markets are Egypt's lifeblood, linking farmers to nobles' villages to cities and the Nile to distant lands. The Silent King's decree has frozen this flow, but it can't stop the merchants' ingenuity. You think about markets beyond Memphis, in Thebes' Heliopolis. Even small delta towns all hush their traders, adapting. With gestures, symbols, or sheer grit. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from that one stall, still gross, eternally gross. A nod to how Egyptians turn even the absurd into survival. The silence, you realize, is a test of their adaptability, reshaping trade into a quiet art form that still keeps the kingdom breathing. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a spice merchant, her hands stained with cumin, standing in her dim stall. She can't shout her prices, can't banter with her neighbor about the new grain tax. Instead, She arranges her sacks in careful rows, her eyes scanning for buyers praying Ra sees her faith. Her brother, a brewer, polishes silent vats nearby, his beer unsold, his family's rations dwindling. Their daughter, maybe 11, sweeps the stall's floor in silence, her usual songs locked away her mind on a copper bangle she can't afford. This family, like thousands, carries the market's weight in their quiet endurance, their trade, a muted offering to the king's soul. You wonder what they hope for when the silence lifts a divine blessing. A packed stall or just a raucous night at the tavern? You grin, betting on the tavern. You pause by a market's edge where a lone trader sits beside a pile of reeds, his hands tracing silent patterns in the dust. The silence feels thicker here, like it's settled into the cracks of the city itself. You think about the artisans, the priests, the courtiers, all shaped by the king's reign, now bound by this quiet struggle. The silent king's legacy. You're starting to see lives in these merchants, their silent trade a testament to Egypt's resilience. You take a deep breath, the air heavy with dust and unspoken deals, and keep walking, ready to weigh the historian's debates next where the silence's true purpose comes under scrutiny. You're drifting through the quiet veins of Memphis, the city's silence now a deep resonant hum, like the echo of a temple drum long stilled. The Nile's soft shimmer weaves through the gaps between mud brick homes and market stalls, its waters reflecting a sky so dense with stars it feels like a divine script. The Silent King's 10-day decree still cloaks Egypt in a profound hush, and tonight you're stepping back to weigh the historians' debates, sifting through their theories on the true purpose of this enigmatic silence. The air carries the scent of cooling earth, faint incense and a whiff of overripe melons from a shuttered stall, and you smirk, thinking, if I clear my throat, will Osiris send a cosmic shush my way? You've wandered to a quieter corner of the city near a small scribal school where papyrus scrolls once rustled with lessons but now sit silent, their students bound by the decree. The school's courtyard, lit by a single flickering lamp, feels like a fitting place to ponder the past puzzles. You lean against a sycamore tree, its leaves still in the windless night, and imagine scholars across centuries arguing over the Silent King's motives. Was his decree a sacred act, a political ploy, or something stranger? The silence you're starting to sense is a riddle, its meaning as layered as the hieroglyphs on a pharaoh's tomb. Bet they're still bickering about it in some dusty lecture hall, you think, grinning. Let's dive into the debate. The Silent King, ruling around 1200 BCE, left a legacy etched in stone. And silence his 10-day decree, a documented anomaly that's puzzled Egyptologists for generations. Historians confirm it was unique. No other pharaoh demanded such a kingdom-wide hush after death. You picture the king's final command, scrawled on papyrus or whispered to priests, sparking a wave of quiet that rippled from Memphis to the Delta. The question is why? You imagine a modern scholar, glasses slipping, poring over crumbling texts, arguing it was a spiritual necessity, while another, coffee in hand, insists it was a power grab. The silence, you realize, is a mirror reflecting the biases of those who study it as much as the king's own intent. One mainstream theory holds that the silence was a religious act, designed to ensure the king's Kai navigated the Duat without disruption. You envision priests teaching that earthly noise, laughter, shouts, even a dropped pot could snag the king's soul, trapping it like a fish in a net. The 10-day hush, then, was Egypt's collective prayer, a way to clear the cosmic airwaves for gods like Anubis and Thoth to guide the king through underworld trials. You picture a farmer, his plow idle, staring at the sky, hoping his silence helps the king face a serpent demon. Bet he's thinking, better you than me, pal. you think chuckling. This view paints the silence as devotion, a kingdom united in faith to secure its ruler's eternity. Another school argues it was political, a calculated move to stabilize Egypt during a vulnerable transition. You ponder the court's intrigues, nobles scheming priests jostling an heir untested. The silence in this light was a leash silencing dissent and forcing unity under the king's lingering shadow. You imagine a vizier, his eyes sharp, using the decree to gag rivals, while the prince's allies spread tales of divine wrath to enforce compliance. The hush you're learning could be a tool of control, ensuring the throne passed smoothly without a whisper of rebellion. You picture a merchant in the market, his goods unsold, grumbling silently about the king's ego. Guy's dead and still running the show. You think smirking. Here's a quirky tidbit some fringe scholars propose. The silence was astrological, tied to a rare celestial event like a comet, or an alignment of planets that the king's priests interpreted as a divine signal for quiet. They claim the hush was meant to align Egypt with the stars, amplifying the king's cosmic ascent. You raise an eyebrow, picturing priests squinting at the night sky, muttering before the silence about a particularly shiny star being Ra's thumbs up. It's a wild theory, but it fits Egypt's obsession with the heavens. Stars weren't just lights, but gods, their movements dictating mortal fates. You glance up the Milky Way, sprawling like a divine highway, and wonder if it's signaling something. Probably just go home, but you nod anyway, just in case. Historians still argue whether the silence was driven by faith, fear, or pragmatism. Some blend the theories, suggesting it was a spiritual act, with political perks uniting Egypt in devotion while stifling unrest. Others see it as a cultural flex, a way for the king to etch his name deeper into history, his silence a monument louder than any obelisk. You ponder this as you pass a shuttered tavern, its usual din of laughter gone, its keeper sweeping silently. The silence you're starting to see is a kaleidoscope, its purpose shifting with every angle, sacred to priests, oppressive to merchants, mythic to scribes. You imagine a modern debate, scholars clashing over Zoom, their voices loud where Egypt's were mute. You keep moving the scribal school, fading into narrower streets where homes lean close, their silence a shared burden. You think about the layers of Egypt's society, farmers, artisans, nobles, all touched by the decree, their lives a canvas for the king's final act. The religious theory resonates when you picture priests burning silent incense, their eyes on the gods. The political angle sharpens when you recall the court's hushed schemes, nobles trading coded glances. The astrological idea, though, outlandish sparks when you see the stars, their patterns a language Egypt read like scripture. You imagine a weaver, her loom still wondering if her silence pleases Ra or just the palace. Bet she's ready to yell either way, you think, grinning. Let's zoom out. The silence is Egypt's mirror reflecting its faith, its fears, its delicate balance of mad. The debates about its purpose reveal as much about the historians as the king. Some see divinity, others see strategy. All see a kingdom holding its breath. You picture villages along the Nile, from muddy hamlets to Thebes' golden spires, all hush their people navigating this enigma. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market, still gross forever. Gross a nod to how Egyptians blended the sacred and absurd, their resilience shining even in silence. The king's decree, you realize, is a puzzle with no single solution. Its truth buried in the quiet itself. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a scribe, his papyrus blank, sitting in his dim home. He can't teach his students, can't debate the king's legacy aloud. Instead, he traces silent hieroglyphs in the dust, weighing whether the silence is holy or just a noble's trick. His wife, a potter, shapes silent clay, her wheel still her hands aching for work. Their daughter, maybe 10, draws a silent unk in the sand, praying it reaches the gods. This family, like thousands, lives the silence as a question, their every act a guess at its purpose. You wonder what they believe: a divine plan, a royal flex, or just a long wait for noise. You grin, betting on the noise. You pause by a small canal, its water glassy, reflecting the stars like a second sky. The silence feels vast here, like it's swallowed the world. You think about the artisans, the merchants, the priests, all shaped by the king's reign, now grappling with this quiet mystery. The silent king's legacy, you're starting to see lives in these debates. His silence, a question that echoes through time, unanswered but endlessly compelling. You take a deep breath, the air cool and laced with dust, and keep walking, ready to reflect on the silence's lasting mark next, where Egypt's memory carries its weight. You're lingering in the quiet heart of Memphis, the city's silence now a familiar embrace, like the gentle lap of the Nile against its banks. The river's faint glow threads through the city's edges, its waters catching a sky strewn with stars that seem to whisper ancient truths. The silent king's 10-day decree has held Egypt in a profound hush. And tonight you're reflecting on how this silence has shaped the kingdom's cultural memory, etching itself into the soul of a people who live between gods and dust. The air smells of dry reeds and fading incense, and you smirk, thinking, if I hum a lullaby, will the stars send a divine noise complaint? You've wandered to the city's outskirts, where Memphis blends into the desert, its mud brick homes giving way to open sand and the distant silhouettes of pyramids. This is a place of endings and beginnings, where the living meet the eternal. You pause by a low stone shrine, its surface worn by countless hands, a single lotus flower resting on its altar, its petals curling in the night's cool breath. The silence feels timeless here, as if it's woven into the very earth, a thread in Egypt's vast tapestry. You imagine the people of Memphis, farmers, artisans, priests, carrying this moment forward, their lives forever marked by the king's final command. Bet they'll be telling this story for centuries, you think, grinning. Let's dive into the legacy of this silence. The silent king, ruling around 1200 BCE, was a titan whose death reshaped Egypt's rhythm, his 10-day decree, a documented singularity that set him apart. Historians confirm that such a mandate was rare, a cultural event that rippled beyond the grave, embedding itself in Egypt's collective memory. You picture scribes in later years, their styluses scratching papyrus, recording the tale of a king who stilled a nation. The silence you're learning wasn't just a moment, it was a monument, a story told in hushed tones around hearths, in temple courtyards, and by Nile fishermen under starlight. It's Egypt's way of remembering a ruler who demanded the impossible and got it. The silence's mark is cultural, a shared experience that binds generations. You wander past a cluster of homes, their lamps dim, and imagine families years from now, their descendants swapping tales of the 10 days when even the Nile seemed to hush. The decree, you realize, gave Egypt a myth, a moment when every voice from Pharaoh to Potter paused for a god-king's soul. You picture a grandmother, her eyes twinkling, telling her grandchildren how her own mother kept silent, fearing Anubis's wrath but secretly proud of Egypt's devotion. Bet she'll spice it up with a ghost story or two, you think, chuckling. The silence in memory becomes larger than life, a symbol of unity, faith, and the king's enduring shadow. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some fringe sources claim the silence inspired a festival in later dynasties, a day of hush, where Egyptians honored the silent king by fasting and quiet reflection, believing it strengthened their bond with the gods. You raise an eyebrow, picturing a village square usually alive with chatter, falling silent as people mimic the ancient decree their eyes on the sky for omens. It's a wild idea, but it fits Egypt's knack for turning history into ritual weaves myths, into the fabric of daily life. You glance at the shrine's lotus, its petals soft, and wonder if such a festival ever took root here. Probably not, but you nod to the flower just in case it knows. Historians still argue whether the silence's cultural impact was deliberate or organic. Some say the king designed it as a legacy, a way to cement his myth by forcing Egypt to pause and reflect on his divinity. Others think it grew naturally, a collective response to a pharaoh's death that became a story of resilience and reverence. You ponder this as you pass a faded mural, its colors showing the king with Ra, their hands joined in eternity. The silence you're starting to see is a cultural echo, its meaning shaped by those who lived it, priests who saw divine will, merchants who endured loss, children who learned to fear the gods' quiet gaze. You imagine it lingering in songs, proverbs, maybe even silent prayers, a memory that outlives stone. You keep walking the desert's edge, pressing closer, its vastness a reminder of Egypt's timelessness. You think about how the silence touched every corner of Egypt's culture. For priests, it was a sacred act, a way to align with Ma'at, the divine order. For artisans, it was a test, their silent crafts a tribute to the king. For commoners, it was a story of endurance, a badge of survival. You picture a scribe years later teaching his students about the decree, his voice low, as if the silence still lingers. The king's legacy, you realize, is not just in his temples or wars, but in this shared memory, a moment when Egypt held its breath and found itself stronger for it. Let's zoom out. The silence is Egypt's cultural heartbeat, a moment that defined a people who lived by the Nile's rhythms and the gods' whims. You imagine its echo in later eras, pharaohs citing the silent king's decree to inspire unity, poets weaving it into hymns, even rebels invoking it to challenge new rulers. You think about the Nile's villages, from the delta's green sprawl to Aswan's rocky cliffs, all touched by this story, their people carrying it like a shared heirloom. You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the market, still gross? Always gross, a nod to how Egyptians blended the mundane with the mythic, their culture, a vibrant mosaic of faith and grit. The silence you're learning is a cornerstone of that mosaic, a memory that binds past to future. Zoom in on the human side. You imagine a fisherman, his nets dry, sitting by the Nile years after the decree. He can't sing his old songs, but he tells his son about the 10 days when Egypt fell silent, his voice soft with awe. His wife, a basket weaver, nods, remembering her own mother's hushed prayers during those days. Their daughter, barely 8, listens wide-eyed, carving a silent ankh in the sand, dreaming of a king who spoke to the gods. This family, like countless others, carries the silence in their bones, their stories a quiet hymn to Egypt's endurance. You wonder what they passed down, pride, wonder, or just a good tale. You grin, betting on the wonder. You pause by the shrine, its lotus now, a silhouette against the stars. The silence feels eternal here, a bridge between the living and the dead. You think about the merchants, the artisans, the priests, all shaped by the king's reign, now part of this quiet legacy. The silent king's decree, you realize, is Egypt's memory, a story that will linger in its culture, long after the sand claims its stones. You take a deep breath, the air cool and heavy with time, and feel the night settle around you, ready to let the silence fade into a softer, final whisper. The stars above Memphis soften now, their light dimming as the night grows heavier, the Nile's gentle ripples fading into a distant hum. You feel the silence loosening its grip, like a long-held breath finally released. The Silent King's journey is underway, his ka gliding through the Duat, guided by the gods and Egypt's devotion. You're standing on the desert's edge, the city behind you, its people dreaming in their quiet homes. The 10 days are nearly done, and you sense the world stirring, ready to sing again. Let the worries of the day slip away like sand through your fingers, and imagine the Nile carrying you toward rest. The king's story, Egypt's story, your story, they all blend into the night's embrace, soft and eternal. Close your eyes, let the stars fade and drift into the quiet of sleep.